I have been looking forward to what Gigabyte has installed for their more affordable next-gen motherboards. So this is it. This is the B850 AORUS Elite Wi-Fi 7. Let's see what this new board is about and how it compares against the previous generation. Thank you Grace and the rest of the Gigabyte HQ for passing me this board to take a look at. I don't have much time with this board and it is the Chinese New Year holidays. What am I doing? So what's inside this box? B850 AORUS Elite Wi-Fi 7. Okay, we have the board. This is cardboard, you can leave it aside. We have the all-black Wi-Fi 7 antenna. I believe this is magnetic, like the one in the X870E board. There are also one pair of SATA cables, the super cool AORUS badge, the Q connector for the easy wiring of the front panel header wires, and a few paper documents, a warranty guide, and a nicely detailed quick install guide. There are no stickers somehow, and I think it's missing an M.2 thermal pad and 2 sets of M.2 rubber pads. They are stated in the manual, so I'm not sure if they are removed during packaging or lost somewhere or there's a mistake in the manual. I must say, Gigabyte seems to do a pretty good job with maintaining a single color on their products. We first saw this on the X870E Pro Ice with their full white design and color palette. And this B850 Elite features an all-black design. Okay, almost full black. 90% of the board is black with some grey and white overtones on the knob bridge, the VRM heatsink, and PCH area. There's like a continuous wave of lines on the background, elevating the L's flat black look. The lines also extend to the back of the board, which is mostly forgotten. I like details like this, which make the design look more full and more continuous. The main design appeal is this shiny 3D audio waveform ish design on the PCH cover and the M.2 heatsink cover. It feels different and nice, and also looks different compared to the one that we saw on the Pro Ice motherboard. From the people at AORUS Design Lab, this board tells you to team up and fight on. Admire this cyberpunk waveform as you game on this motherboard. Well, I am fighting on to create content, but not gonna team up anytime soon. As a B850 board, compared to X870E and X870, you're not going to get any USB 4 ports on this board, but you will get USB, which you are more familiar with, such as 4 USB 2.0 in black, 1 Type-C 10 gig per second ports, 5 USB 3.2 Gen 1, which is also known as USB 5 gig per second ports, 2 USB Type-A in red, these are 10 gig per second, where one of them is used to flash and update your motherboard's BIOS. And at the front, the USB is also pretty standard. There's a USB Type-C 20 gigs per second port, 1 USB 5 gig per second header, giving you access to 2 USB at the front and 2 USB 2.0 at the bottom. The rest of the back I/O is also pretty standard. There's one HDMI port, one Q-Flash Plus to flash the BIOS, the 2.5G Ethernet port, the attachments to insert the Wi-Fi 7 antenna, and the 3 audio ports. Oh wait, let me confirm if this Wi-Fi 7 antenna is magnetic. So I guess the main difference between a B850, X870 and X870E for that matter, besides the 2 missing USB 4, are the connections in the rest of the USB and PCIe, which also consists of the M.2 slots. Something like this X870E Pro Ice, Gigabyte chose to, in a way, give more emphasis to the PCIe area rather than the USB. As in, since the missing USB 4, the rest of the USB ports is more or less the same. But you will definitely get more in the PCIe area, which I will get to in the later half of the video. So stay tuned. And if you love what you're seeing so far or are learning something about this new motherboard, please consider smashing the subscribe button and pressing the notification bell. Thank you. So let's now circle back to the CPU socket. It's the standard AM5 socket, but somehow it looks pretty good against the black background. Maybe because this board is relatively new and unused. So this AM5 socket allows you to put AMD Ryzen 7000, 8000 and 9000 CPUs. You can overclock your Ryzen CPUs on this B850, and this board comes with a 14+2+2 power phase design to regulate the power and voltage. The VRM heatsinks are also of a nice size, with a fancy gamer-ish grill-like design to remove the heat that may be generated around the socket area. The knob bridge or I/O area's heatsink is also kind of big, with what looks like an overlapping design to cover the capacitors and the chokes. However, Gigabyte chose to give you one 4-pin and one 8-pin EPS power connectors for your CPU, rather than the now more common 2 8-pin CPU power connectors. I believe there should still be enough power headroom, even if you do overclock a 7950X on this motherboard. But just to be safe, do make use of both power connectors. Next to the right, there are 4 RAM or memory slots. If you ever need 256 gigs of DDR5 RAM, you will be able to do so with these 4 slots. These slots can only take non-ECC or unregistered DIMMs or UDIMMs. I'm not able to find any info or pricing on 4 sticks 64 gig RAM modules, but if 256 gigs of RDIMMs DDR5 costs almost 1.5k, and technically 256 gigs of UDIMMs should cost less, but I don't think they will cost as much less compared to the RDIMMs. So do take that in mind and you can do the math. And as for the other headers, we start off with a pretty interesting arrangement for the fan headers. The CPU optional and CPU fan are now closer to the center. The main CPU fan in particular is rotated vertically. Most of you will use this CPU fan for your air coolers. So would a vertical header be any different? Let me try and let you know. Now, where is the palm header? So Gigabyte decides to throw you a curveball by having the palm header at the bottom right next to the fan header. I guess this may work for AIOs with long wire leads or those that uses a fan control box such that the box is at the center and both the CPU and palm wires can reach the top and bottom respectively. Or perhaps this will also work for custom cooling units. Well, I guess if that doesn't work, I think you can still use the CPU optional for your AIO palm wire. Next, there are 3 ARGB Gen 2 headers on this board, 1 on the top right and 2 on the bottom left. And if you still want to use your RGB strips, you can do so with this 4-pin RGB header also on the bottom left. And talking about fan headers, this board gives you 3 of them. This fan header is labeled as fan palm, so I'll just leave it as a separate palm header. And if you need to install intake fans at the bottom, you can also do so. Gigabyte boards of this tier also tends to give you a set of reset and power buttons. The start button is useful for pre-testing this board as well as the other PC parts that you plan to use for this build before you put all of them inside a case. If there's any issue with this board or other components and you are stuck trying to boot, you can use this reset button to try again. And talking about boot and pre-testing, how do you do so? Well, these are for diagnosing your system. Unlike ASUS boards which show different colors, these lights only show one. But luckily, they are nicely labeled with big text. Top left is for CPU, top right is for DRAM, bottom left is VGA, and the last is boot. So if you see any of these light up during your boot sequence, it should be a good indicator as to what components you will need to fix or to replace. Okay, as we move down, we see the 24-pin ATX power connector followed by this unique port. I have first showed this to you on the X870E Pro Ice motherboard. This is an external HDMI port for separate tablet or monitor. This port allows you to show videos or GIFs at 1080p 30Hz. I hope I can find a tablet to show you this. This is pretty cool. And as we go on to the bottom, we start off with the front audio header on the left. There's a TPM header for a discrete TPM device, followed by an LED demo header. I believe shops or exhibitors can use this port to showcase the board's ARGB effects without a need for a CPU, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. And finally, we finish with the front panel headers and CMOS battery on the right. The front panel here seems to be more properly labeled compared to the other brands, and Gigabyte bundles the commonly used ones with others like those such as speaker. And before I go on to the battery, there are 2 jumpers here. The one on the top is reset, and the one on the bottom is to clear your CMOS. The reset jumper allows you to reset your PC if it freezes, and you can also change its functions in the BIOS. The clear CMOS, on the other hand, allows you to reset whatever changes that you have made to the BIOS to the factory default settings. If you overclock your PC and it fails, for example, you can use this clear CMOS jumper to set the BIOS back to the original settings. And as for the battery, at least this one is at a more convenient location. It's definitely way more accessible, and yes, you can actually remove and install it back in. I hope Gigabyte doesn't pull another stunt like what we saw on the X870E Pro Ice. Alright, let's proceed on to the main area. Am I right about B850 having less connectivity? Let's take a look and find out. This top slot with what Gigabyte calls the ultra durable PCI Gene Armor is a full-length PCI Gen 5 X16. This is where your current generation graphics cards will go. And as you can see, it makes use of a button press to install your GPU. You insert your GPU as per normal, and you'll feel a click if it's inserted properly. To release your GPU, just press this button and lift off the graphics card. It is very easy to do. This is kind of older school, but it still works, and I know that my graphics card is very secure in the slot. Can you use your graphics cards for the bottom PCI slots? Well, you can physically, but electrically, I wouldn't recommend it. Why? Because these 2 black slots run at PCI Gen 3 X1 speeds. They will definitely stuff the performance of your Gen 4 or even a Gen 5 GPU unless you are using a Gen 3 card. But that said, the X1 speeds on the slots will still starve your GPU anyway. So what do you do with these two slots? Well, I guess you can still use a capture card on one of these slots. Well, how about storage? Besides the 4 SATA ports on the right, you have a few M.2 slots. How many? Let's remove this cover to take a look. So there are 3 of them, and they run at different speeds. Like the PCIe slots, I'm just going to focus on Ryzen 7000 and Ryzen 9000 features. With Ryzen 9000 and Ryzen 7000, this top slot will run at Gen 5 X4, the one in the middle is a Gen 4 X4, and the one at the bottom is also a Gen 4 X4. And Gigabyte tells you that it is Gen 5 and is for M.2, clearly right on the slots. Gen 5 SSDs do run warmer than Gen 4s, so there's a double thermal pad backing when you insert your Gen 5 SSD into the top slot. But that said, you can still use your Gen 4 SSD in the top slot. Remember to remove both films from both the top and bottom pads first if you plan to use this slot. The M.2 lockers seem to be soldered or permanently fixed onto these slots, and Gigabyte does not provide extra lockers, hence you will have to use what they give to you. So with this top slot, you can insert your standard length 2280 SSDs. Insert your SSD into the connector and turn the turnstile to lock the SSD in place. The second M.2 allows both the standard 2280 as well as the longer 2210 SSDs. A 2210 SSD shares the same locker as the M.2 cover. How does this work? Wouldn't the easy latch on the 2280 actually get in the way of the 2210? And how do you actually lock the SSD in place together with the heatsink cover? If I can find a 2210 SSD, I will demonstrate to you how it works. And this final slot only accepts the 2280 SSD and uses the same locking style as the top slot. One thing I have to mention here, the heatsink cover doesn't close as well when you have a drive in the top slot because there's both the bottom and top thermal pads. And the thermal pads generally make the SSDs sticky when you close the heatsink over them. If you plan to use the top slot, make sure to slide the thermal cover hooks into the notches, and also make sure to check that the lock is fully flushed before turning on the PC. You should feel a click nonetheless, and the lock should be at the full locked position. This is not meant to be a full review, but there are some things which I would like to point out. Number 1, there's not a lot of ARGB on this motherboard. It is a true black board with only 3 ARGB LEDs beneath the PCH cover area around the PCH. I was kind of expecting the knob bridge to light up, but it didn't. So it's okay. 2, about the vertical fan header, I guess it is kind of slightly beneficial for cable management. But if you're not into details, it does not make much of a difference. I guess from a design standpoint, a vertical header will take up less footfall, or in this case, less wire fall. So this will allow you to squeeze in more features in this general area. Number 3, the heatsink cover does close better, also on the top slot after multiple usages, as in removing and closing the heatsink cover many times. About the PCIe and M.2, I forgot to mention that there is no halving or disabling if you are to use certain slots. That's why Gigabyte gave you 2 Gen 3 slots, because I guess they ran out of PCIe lanes. This is just a conjecture, so take it with a grain of salt. The 3 M.2 slots with that 1 PCIe full-length slot should be enough for a mid-range user, which this board is targeted at. Number 5, I am using a 7950X on this board. I didn't push it because I am using a ray prism to cool that CPU, but the VRM headers felt very cool even after long usage. Remember to use a 360mm AIO or a much beefier air cooler than this ray prism if you want to use something like a 7950X. Number 6, I have also updated the BIOS to version F2E, and I see a new function called Expo AI Boost. I'm not sure what this does because it is grayed out for this pair of G-Skill Z5 Neo. Perhaps you need RAM sticks such as those CU DIMMs that allow you to run at speeds higher than 6000 megatransfers per second. Anyway, overall, this is a pretty good board. I like the little features such as the start button, and I think most people will appreciate having a G connector that Gigabyte provides for your front panel header. So if you like this overview and a mini review, make sure to smash the like button, and you also can catch the X870E Pro Ice from Gigabyte. And catch you in the next video.